The coffee was already cold by the time I noticed it sitting on the counter. I poured it 40 minutes earlier, right after I got back from my morning walk, and then I got distracted pulling weeds along the front path and forgot all about it. That's the kind of thing that happens when you live alone. You pour a cup of coffee, and the morning just takes you somewhere else, and suddenly it's cold, and you're standing in the kitchen wondering where the time went. I'm 67 years old. My name is Frank. I worked 31 years as a mechanical engineer for a manufacturing company outside of Columbus, Ohio, and I retired 4 years ago with a decent pension, a paid-off house on Birchwood Lane, and what I thought was a pretty solid relationship with my son and his wife. I thought wrong, but let me back up. Because the story of what happened last October doesn't make any sense unless you understand who I am and what I'd been doing for the 5 years before it. My wife, Carol, passed away in 2018. Pancreatic cancer. She was diagnosed in March and gone by August. 5 months. That's all we got from the moment the doctor said the words to the moment I sat in a funeral home on a gray Tuesday afternoon, picking out a casket. 28 years of marriage, and then 5 months, and then silence. I don't talk about that period of my life much. Not because I'm hiding from it, but because there are some things that don't get smaller no matter how many times you describe them. You just carry them. After Carol died, my son Brendan and his wife Tiffany invited me to move into their spare bedroom. They had a 4-bedroom house in Glenbrook, about 12 miles from where I'd lived with Carol. Brendan said it made sense. He said I shouldn't be alone in that house with all those memories. He said they had the space and they wanted me close. I said yes because I was grieving and I was tired, and yes sounded easier than anything else. That was the first mistake. Not because living with family is wrong, but because I moved in without any clear understanding of what the arrangement actually was, and, in the absence of that clarity, it became something I never would have agreed to if someone had described it to me plainly at the start. Within a year, I was paying half the mortgage. Brendan had explained that it was just to help with expenses, that it was only temporary, that once he got a raise at work, things would settle down. I was getting my pension every month, and I had savings from the sale of the Birchwood house. So I said fine. Half the mortgage was about $1,100 a month. I thought of it as rent, essentially. Then the utilities got added. Then the groceries. Tiffany had a habit of doing one big grocery run every week and leaving the receipt on the kitchen island. And somewhere along the way, it became understood that I would cover it, $400, sometimes $500 a week, for a household of 3 adults and 2 kids, my grandchildren, Owen, who was 9, and Lily, who was 6. I love those kids. I want to be clear about that. Owen and Lily were the best part of my days in that house. Owen was obsessed with dinosaurs and could tell you the difference between a Brachiosaurus and a Diplodocus with the serious authority of a tenured professor. Lily drew pictures on construction paper and taped them to my bedroom door. I still have a stack of them in a folder in my closet, a crayon drawing of a dog, even though we didn't have a dog. A house with a rainbow above it. A stick figure she labeled Grandpa with a crown on his head. I was not going to let anything that happened between me and their parents touch what I had with those 2 kids. That was non-negotiable from the start, and it stayed that way. But I'm getting ahead of myself. By the 3rd year of living in that house, I was covering roughly $300 a month in household expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, and various things that came up. Tiffany's car needed new tires. The backyard fence needed replacing. The furnace went out in January, and the repair bill was $2,200, and Brendan looked at me across the kitchen table with an expression I'd come to recognize, a kind of patient waiting, like a man sitting at a toll booth, and I wrote the check. I also drove. Brendan worked from home most days, and Tiffany's job was a 20-minute commute, so she had the car in the mornings. If Owen or Lily needed to be somewhere, school pickup, a doctor's appointment, a birthday party, I was the one who took them. Which I genuinely didn't mind. I told you, I love those kids. But I want you to understand the full picture of what my life looked like inside that house, because what happened in October needs that context. I cooked 3 or 4 nights a week. I did yard work on weekends. I took the trash to the curb every Tuesday and Friday. I was not a guest in that house. I was, in every functional sense, a member of the household staff who also happened to be paying rent. And I told myself it was fine. I told myself this is what family does. I told myself Carol would want me to be there for Brendan, to be present for the grandkids, to not be stubborn about money when I had enough to give. Carol was generous. She was the most generous person I ever knew, but she also had a spine made of something close to steel, and I think she would have said something to me about what I was allowing to happen. I think she would have sat me down and said, "Frank, there's a difference between generosity and being taken advantage of, and you need to figure out which one this is." I didn't figure it out until October. It was a Thursday evening, the second week of the month. I remember because I'd just paid the monthly expenses 2 days before, the full amount, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going through some paperwork from my financial advisor. Nothing dramatic, just reviewing accounts, making sure everything was in order. Tiffany came into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. She stood there for a moment staring into it, the way people do when they're not really looking for anything, but they're also not ready to stop standing in front of the refrigerator. Then she said, without turning around, "We need milk, and I think we're out of the good orange juice." I looked up. "I can pick some up tomorrow." She closed the refrigerator and turned around and leaned against the counter with her arms crossed. She was 39 years old, and she had the kind of face that was pretty when she was relaxed and something harder when she wasn't. She wasn't relaxed right now. "Actually," she said, "Brendan and I have been talking." I put my papers down. "We've been talking about the arrangement here," she said. "And honestly, Frank, it's getting to be a lot, having another adult in the house. The kids are getting older, and they need their space, and Brendan and I need our space, and it's a lot." I didn't say anything. I was waiting to hear where this was going. "We think it might be time to look at other options," she said. "For you." There it was. "Other options," I repeated. "There are some really nice senior communities in the area." Brendan looked at a few of them. "They have activities and, people your own age. It would be good for you." I want to tell you exactly what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. I didn't feel sad. I felt something that took me a moment to identify, and when I identified it, it surprised me a little. I felt embarrassed. Not for myself. For her. For the fact that she was standing in a kitchen that I had been largely funding for 3 years, leaning against a refrigerator that I had stocked probably 700 times, telling me that I'd become inconvenient. "Does Brendan know you're having this conversation with me?" I asked. "We talked about it together," she said. "We're on the same page. I'd like to hear that from him." She pushed off the counter and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Brendan came in about 10 minutes later. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table. He was 42, my son. And he had my coloring and his mother's eyes, and in that moment he could barely meet mine. "Dad," he said. "Go ahead," I said. He cleared his throat. "Look, it's nothing personal. It's just that, with the house and the kids and everything, having you here has kind of become, it's a lot to manage." "A lot to manage," I said. "You know what I mean." "I'm not sure I do, Brendan, because from where I'm sitting, I've been covering more than half the costs of running this house for 3 years. I pick up your kids from school. I cook dinner 4 nights a week. I redid the back fence in July. So help me understand what exactly is such a burden about my being here." He flinched at the word. "Good. It's not about money," he said. "Then what's it about?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and I want you to hear this clearly, because these are his exact words. "You're just always here, Dad. It's like we can't have our own life with you constantly around. Constantly around. In the house I was paying for. Cooking the food I was buying. Always there." I nodded slowly. I picked up my papers and my tea, and I said goodnight, and I went to my room, and I closed the door, and I sat on the edge of my bed in the quiet for a long time. I wasn't going to cry. I was past crying about things like this, but I sat there for a while, just breathing. the way you do when something lands hard and you need a minute before you can move. Here is the thing about being in your 60s and having lived through real loss. You develop a very clear sense of what matters and what doesn't, and more importantly, what you will and won't allow. I had sat in a hospital room and watched the woman I loved more than anyone in the world disappear piece by piece over 5 months. And I had held her hand at the end, and I had kept breathing, and I had kept going. That had not broken me. This was not going to break me either, but it was going to change things. I didn't say anything the next morning, or the morning after that. I was polite at breakfast. I took Lily to her piano lesson on Saturday. I helped Owen with a school project about the water cycle on Sunday afternoon. I was exactly who I had always been in that house. But I was also thinking very clearly. I had, over the course of 3 years, contributed what I calculated to be just over $136,000 to the running of that household. I had kept no receipts, signed nothing, had no documentation of any kind, because it had never occurred to me that I would need documentation. It was family. You don't keep receipts on family. That was the second mistake. What I did have was a credit card that Brendan had asked me to add him and Tiffany to as authorized users about 18 months earlier. The explanation at the time was that it would make household purchases easier, so they could buy things without having to ask me for cash or a check each time. I'd agreed because it seemed reasonable, and because at that point I was still operating under the assumption that we were a functional family unit with aligned interests. I pulled up the credit card statements on my laptop that Sunday night. I am not a dramatic person. I don't exaggerate for effect, and I don't catastrophize. So when I tell you what I found on those statements, I want you to understand that I am giving you the plain facts. Over the previous 4 months, Brendan and Tiffany had charged approximately $9,400 to that card. Some of it was household purchases. I could see the grocery store, the hardware store, the kids' school supply runs. That was fine. That was what the card was supposed to be for. But there were other charges. A spa in downtown Columbus charged 3 times over 2 months, totaling $680. A restaurant I'd never heard of, twice, once for $310 and once for $290. A hotel in Scottsdale, Arizona that I had to look up because I didn't recognize the name, for 2 nights in September, $847. And then, at the bottom of the most recent statement, a charge from a travel agency that stopped my scrolling entirely, $23,400. I stared at it for a long time. I clicked on the details. It was a travel package. 2 weeks in Italy, Florence, Rome, the Amalfi Coast. Business class flights. 4-star hotels throughout. Booked for 2 adults, departing in late January. I had not been invited on this trip. I had not been consulted about it. I had not even known it was being planned. I had, however, apparently agreed to pay for it. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair. I thought about Tiffany in the kitchen telling me that having me there was a lot. I thought about Brendan saying I was constantly around and that they couldn't have their own life. I thought about 31 years of engineering work and the pension I'd earned and the savings I'd built and the $136,000 that had flowed out of my accounts and into that house over 3 years. I thought about Owen and Lily. I thought about Carol. And then I made some decisions. I did not confront them that night. I'm not an impulsive person. When something big needs doing, I prefer to do it right rather than fast. The first call I made was to my financial advisor, Ed, on Monday morning. I told him what I'd found and what I was planning to do. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Frank, I've been waiting for you to call me about this for about 1.5 years. He helped me move the bulk of my savings into a new account that only I had access to. He also helped me draft a letter that we would send to the credit card company removing Brendan and Tiffany as authorized users. The second call was to a real estate agent named Donna, who I'd used back when I sold the house on Birchwood Lane after Carol passed. She was sharp and straightforward, and she remembered me. I told her I was in the market for something small, a 2-bedroom, maybe a townhouse or a condo, something with a yard, even a small one, because I liked having somewhere to put my hands in the dirt. She said she'd have some options for me within the week. The third thing I did was call my attorney, a man named Phil who I'd worked with for years, and I updated my will. I don't need to go into the details of what changed. But it changed. Then I waited. Not passive waiting, quiet, purposeful waiting. I kept my routine. I was present at dinner. I helped with the kids. I gave nothing away. The Italy trip came up at dinner on a Wednesday, about 10 days after I'd pulled up those statements. Tiffany mentioned it casually, the way you mention something you don't feel the need to explain or justify because you assume the funding is already settled. We finalized the itinerary for January, she said. The hotel in Florence has incredible reviews. I looked up from my plate. That sounds nice, I said. Where in Florence? She seemed pleased that I'd asked. She told me about the hotel, about the Uffizi Gallery, about a cooking class they'd booked outside the city. She talked about it for several minutes. Brendan smiled across the table. Owen asked if there were nights in Italy, and Lily wanted to know if they would bring her back a souvenir. Of course, baby, Tiffany said. I smiled and nodded and finished my dinner. That night, I called the travel agency. It took about 20 minutes. The representative confirmed the booking, confirmed the amount, confirmed that the card on file was mine. I explained that I had not authorized this purchase and that I would be disputing the charge. She was professional about it. She asked if I wanted to cancel the booking or simply dispute the charge with the card company. I thought about it for a moment. I canceled the booking. Then I called the credit card company and removed Brendan and Tiffany as authorized users effective immediately. The representative asked if I'd like to issue a new card number for myself. I said yes. Then I called Donna and told her to go ahead and schedule those property viewings. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next morning, I was up early as usual, and I had the coffee going before anyone else came downstairs. Brendan came into the kitchen first, in his work-from-home outfit, the fleece and the worn-out jeans. He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter and said, "Morning." "Morning," I said. "You hear anything from Donna about the condos?" He knew I was looking. I'd mentioned it briefly, said I'd taken their suggestion seriously and started looking at my options. He'd seemed relieved when I said it, which told me everything I needed to know about how genuine the "we want what's best for you" framing had been. "She sent a few listings," I said. "I'm going to look at a couple next week." "Good," he said. "Good for you, Dad." 3 days later, the cancellation notice arrived from the travel agency. I know this because Tiffany came into the living room at approximately 7:30 in the evening holding her phone with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Something between confusion and a particular kind of panic that happens when you realize the floor you've been standing on has a very different foundation than you thought. "The travel agency sent me a cancellation notice," she said. I was reading. I looked up. "For Italy," she said. "I know," I said. The room got very quiet. Brendan came in from the hallway, apparently having heard her voice. "What's going on?" he said. "The Italy trip was canceled," Tiffany said. She was still looking at me. "Frank canceled it." Brendan looked at me. "What?" "That booking was made on my credit card without my knowledge or consent," I said. I kept my voice level. This was important. Not cold, not heated, just clear. I didn't authorize it. So I canceled it and disputed the charge. "That's our canceled it and disputed the charge." "That's our trip," Tiffany said. Her voice had climbed slightly. "We planned that trip. We've been planning it for months." "On my card," I said. "You always pay for things," she said, "and I want you to notice the logic there, because it's worth noticing. You always pay for things." As if the habit of my generosity had transformed my money into a communal resource that existed for their use. "I did," I said. "I paid for a great many things in this house. I've been thinking about the numbers, actually. Over 3 years, I've contributed somewhere in the neighborhood of $136,000 to household expenses here, not counting the card charges." Brendan had gone pale. "And a few weeks ago," I continued, "you sat across this table and told me that having me here was too much, that I was in the way, that you couldn't live your life with me constantly around." I paused. I took that to heart. "So I'm moving out. I've found a place, actually. A 2-bedroom townhouse about 6 miles from here." I'll be out by the end of the month. Dad, Brendan started. I'm not finished, I said, and something in my voice made him stop. I've also removed you both from my credit card, and I've made some adjustments to other financial arrangements that we had discussed previously. I wasn't going to spell out the will. That was private, but I wanted them to understand that the arrangements they had counted on were not what they had been. I want to be clear that none of this affects Owen and Lily. My relationship with those kids is completely separate from what's happened between us, and I won't let it touch them. Tiffany said, "You can't do this." "I can," I said, "and I have." There was more after that. Raised voices, not from me. Some accusations I won't repeat because they don't deserve to be repeated. Brendan eventually sat down heavily on the sofa and rubbed his face with both hands and didn't say much at all, which I think was his version of beginning to understand what had happened. I went to bed that night at my usual time. The townhouse on Maple Creek Drive turned out to be better than I expected. 2 bedrooms, a small back patio, a patch of grass that gets good afternoon sun. The kitchen is smaller than what I had on Birchwood Lane, but it's well laid out, and the light in the mornings is very good, which matters to me more than I would have predicted before I lived through several years of bad light. I moved out on the 28th of October. Brendan helped me carry boxes silently, which I thought was both the least he could do and something he didn't have to do, and I noted it. Owen cried a little when I left, which was the hardest part. I held him for a long time in the driveway and told him that I was only 6 miles away and that I expected him to come over and tell me more about the Cretaceous period as soon as I got my living room set up. He wiped his nose on his sleeve and said okay. Lily gave me a drawing she'd made the night before. A stick figure with a crown and a new house beside it, and a sun in the corner. I have it on the refrigerator at Maple Creek Drive. It's been 7 months since I moved out. Brendan and I have had 2 real conversations since then. Not warm ones, but honest ones. He knows what happened and why. He doesn't fully accept his part in it yet, but I think he's working on it. Tiffany has not reached out. Owen and Lily come over every other weekend. I pick them up on Saturday morning, and we go to the Science Museum, or we make pancakes, or we just sit in a backyard, and Owen tells me things about prehistoric creatures, and Lily draws pictures at the kitchen table. 2 weeks ago, Owen found a spider web in the garden and spent 45 minutes lying on his stomach in the grass, observing it while I read in my chair beside him. And I thought, this is a good life. This is a genuinely good life. I want to say one thing to anyone listening who is in a situation like the one I was in. Generosity is a beautiful thing. I don't regret any of the money. I regret that I allowed the terms of the arrangement to drift so far from what any reasonable person would call fair, and I regret that I didn't trust my own read of the situation earlier. I knew something was wrong before that conversation with Tiffany. I'd known it for a while. I just told myself a story about family and what family requires of you, and I kept revising that story every time something happened that should have been a signal. Your children becoming adults doesn't mean you owe them your retirement. Loving your family doesn't mean funding a lifestyle they haven't earned. Being generous is not the same thing as being a resource. And when someone tells you explicitly that your presence is a burden and that you are in their way, believe them. Not because they're right about you, but because it tells you exactly where you stand. I poured a fresh cup of coffee this morning, and I drank it while it was still hot. Sitting on the back patio at Maple Creek Drive, watching a cardinal on the fence post at the edge of the yard. It stayed there for a long time, that bird, bright red against the gray wood, not in a hurry to go anywhere. Neither am I. I've had 7 months now to sit with everything that happened, and the thing I keep coming back to isn't the money. It's not the $23,000 trip, or the $136,000, or any of the numbers I added up on a Sunday night at my kitchen table. The thing I keep coming back to is a much simpler question. How did I let it go on that long? I don't ask that to be hard on myself. I ask it because I think it's the honest question, and I've always believed that honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it points back at you, is the only thing that actually moves you forward. Here's what I'd figured out. I confused generosity with responsibility. I told myself a story where being a good father meant never saying no, never drawing a line, never letting Brendan feel like my help had conditions. And for a while that story felt true. But somewhere in the third year of writing checks and stocking that refrigerator and sitting quietly while my own comfort and dignity got smaller and smaller, the story stopped being about generosity and started being about fear. Fear of being difficult. Fear of being the old man who makes things complicated. Fear that if I pushed back, I'd lose what little closeness I still had with my son. That fear cost me more than $136,000. It cost me years of living in a way that didn't match who I actually am. What changed wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. When Brendan sat across that table and told me I was constantly around, I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. There's a difference. Rage makes you act fast and sloppy. Clarity makes you act slow and right. I went to my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, and I made a decision. Not to punish anyone, but to stop participating in an arrangement that had quietly stopped being fair. Every action I took after that night was the direct result of choices that had been made for years before it. Tiffany didn't book a $23,400 trip on my card because she was a bad person in that one moment. She did it because the pattern of the previous 3 years had taught her, reasonably, that there would be no consequences. I had created that pattern, and so it fell to me to change it. Brendan is working through something now that I think is genuinely hard for him. He's 42 years old, and he has to reckon with the fact that he allowed his father to be used and said nothing. That's not easy to look at in yourself. I'm not rushing him through it, but I'm also not going back to who I was in that house. Owen came over last Saturday. He's 10 now, and he spent 40 minutes in my backyard studying a spider web, completely absorbed, narrating his observations to me in a serious voice while I sat in my chair with my coffee, actually hot this time. And I thought about Carol, and I thought about the life I almost spent down to nothing, trying to hold on to something that was slipping away from me anyway. And I thought, this is what it looks like when you finally stop shrinking. The cardinal is back on the fence post this morning. Same bird, I think. Or maybe a different one. Either way, it's not in any hurry. Neither am I.